Well,
can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, Mr. President.
Yes.
I like that. What are you using, the OBS Studio or something?
Yeah, OBS.
Nice.
And then fake cam through. What are you talking about? I'm sitting here at my table at home. No. I guess, yeah, you should just get started. We're right on time. So.
No worries.
Well,
I'll get started if you can see my screen.
Yes, we see it. Thanks.
All right. So today we'll be talking about integrating Sitecore Content Hub with any external application. I am Akshay Sura. If you do not know me, I would like to be your friend. I've been doing Sitecore for quite a bit of time, for over 13 years. If you need any help or guidance or anything of that sort in the Sitecore community space, you can reach out to me on Slack or Twitter or any other social network. So getting right into it, there's two major ways of integrating into Content Hub. One is REST API. Just like all other REST APIs, you have complete control over the calls you make. You don't have to pull in any external libraries, but you do have to wire up everything yourself, including the calls to each of the APIs, provide all the attributes. And again, they're fairly well, the good amount of APIs let you do whatever you need to. So based on the functionality you want to achieve, you could mix and match different APIs to achieve the goal you're looking for. It's almost like you have a recipe with all the ingredients. You can mix it and you can bake it. You could bake it into a cake or a cupcake if you want, or a pancake for that matter. The REST API is fairly well documented, so most of the documentation on Style Labs is very decent. As long as you have a little bit of background, you've played with the Content Hub instance, might have a little bit of training. The docs do predominantly most of the job. They are fairly well kept up to date, and you could update it yourself or recommend an update as well if you want to. So in order to make a REST API-based call, you need a couple of different things in order to get the token, security token. So you do need to add a user, give appropriate permissions for different sections. You also need to add or use an existing OAuth client secret. So essentially, if you can make a call from Postman, you should be able to pretty much make a call from any piece of technology you're trying to integrate Content Hub into. So IoT devices, you name it, you got it. You can make a web call. You should be able to integrate with Content Hub using the REST API. There's a on the SDK end, you have a JavaScript SDK, and until yesterday, I didn't really get into it. So I started looking into the JavaScript SDK. Don't really know much about it, but it does have a good amount of extraction. So you do get to install an NPM module. So if you have a React or an Angular-based app, you could install the JavaScript SDK. It gives you all the methods in there for you to connect as well as to call Content Hub to get various entities and so on. The final piece, which is what I wanted to talk about, is the Web Client SDK. Now, this is external libraries you will be pulling in via a NuGet feed into your solution. They are pre-built, so you don't have to do low-level calls. You could integrate it pretty easy. You don't have to spend quite a bit of time. So one of the things I'm hoping to show you is an ASP.NET Core MVC app, which I wrote, which pulls content from Content Hub, and it literally took me like 10 to 15 minutes to do it. Really not that hard. So this is more like a box of cake where you just mix the ingredients and throw it into the oven and you're done with it. Again, the documentation is there. It's fairly well documented. Content Hub by itself, when you're trying to work with it, and I'll show some of this, the challenges I faced and how I figured it out, just how they store and expose the raw entity itself makes it easier for you to look at what you need to do in order to have different actions on using the methods instead of the SDK. Again, like I mentioned, it's a gated NuGet feed, so if you have access to it, you could pretty much pull whatever you need to. And You essentially pull the NuGet. They keep it pretty well updated. So this one was updated in June, and I'm using 3.4.1, but they seem to be updating it quite often. There are a few examples out there. So this one is an older example, but it does give you an idea of how the Web Client SDK can be used, how they connect, how they query for entities, how do you add one, how do you add relationships. So this is a good base point to take a look at to get used to it. Chris Williams also has a repo which you can pull. So Chris likes developing Visual Studio Code. It works for him. So you use the script files, and it's very similar to the scripts you write inside of Content Hub. I personally use the .NET Core apps from Visual Studio itself because the scenario I'm trying to use is external integrations coming in, pushing and pulling a lot of data. So for me, that works. But either would work. From a Web Client SDK perspective, it gives you all the pre-built methods already for you to do a bunch of things with entities and Content Hub, but you can also make raw API calls from the web client. So you're not restricted to just the Web Client SDK. You are able to make API calls using the raw method if you want to. Three main entities. There's several entities in Content Hub depending on the version you're using. Depends how much you can manipulate or add new entities or not. But the three which I wanted to go over are m.asset, which is what is used in digital asset management, m.pcm.product, which is used in product content management, and m.content, which is used in content marketing platform. So three main entities, but there's quite a few things which link to it. So there's like product families, catalogs, content types. So there's quite a few which you can deal with, but these are the three which stand out. Before we get into the demo part of it, I just wanted to quickly run through this. So similar to the old SQL days, and I have not done SQL in quite a bit of time, directly in a while, but you had relationships where you had one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many. Similar fashion inside of Content Hub, entities relate to each other. There's relationship objects in between, which try to relate one to many parents, many children, one-to-one, things of that sort. So I just wanted to quickly call that out. So from a demo perspective, get to that. What I wanted to show you guys, looks like I didn't open it yet. So I'm not quite sure how many of you guys have used Content Hub or not in the past, but I'll quickly go through Content Hub, and this is one of our demo instances. And while we do that, so by default, this is one of the demo instances, like I mentioned, every single screen. So this is a web SaaS-based offering, which is offered to customers, right? So depending on the brand you're currently working on, you could customize it to look, feel exactly like what the brand looks. So that from a CSS perspective, from logos or fonts, you could customize this whichever way you want. You could customize every single page with the layout you want, which most works for you. And depending on the products you purchase, typically when you buy PCM, you get DAM with, well, you have to get DAM with it. But from a product perspective, there's like any other product storage system. You have catalogs, and again, you can have multiple catalogs, and you have product families, which are really categories. You could have, again, multiple of them. They may or may not relate to a catalog or a product. You could span it across all your products if you choose to. And then there's products themselves. Each of these entities you could customize to, obviously how it fits your organization. So you go through this process of domain model definition when you first get Content Hub, and you walk through with the Content Hub team and actually build on how exactly you're going to store your products, your assets, your content. Again, every single piece on here is customizable. So you could have multiple panels. You could have panels based on conditional logic. So if product is of type something, then you can hide or show a panel required, and it's actually pretty extensive. You have your own workflow for a different type of asset. You could obviously link a product to different assets, product to different pieces of content. Same goes for assets themselves, and I think DAM is one of the most complicated piece in Content Hub, just because of the number of things you need to do with it. So from an asset perspective, think about, PDFs, images, videos, anything you can think of. There's processing involved. You can customize how images are processed when they get uploaded. You could create compressed images in terms of size or just the dimensions, things like that. Again, all of these panels are customizable. For instance, you could say if this image is of type product, then show the product details section. If not, hide it. There's quite a bit of metadata which comes by default when you upload it, and then once you get into DRM, it kind of gets a little bit complicated. And again, all of them have their own workflows. The last piece I want to quickly show is Cmp. So as you can see, I have a type of user group. So Cmp runs off of a base entity called as m.content. m.content needs a type. So you can define your different types based on the kind of storage you're trying to store, for instance. So this is one of the contents of type user group. So the base entity is m.content, but the type is user group. So depending on that, you get access to a few fields. So the stuff on the left, which you see, is content area, for the lack of a better word. So you can add a piece of content, attach a bunch of assets to it. On the right is the details part. So this part of an asset or a piece of content, you could have complicated fields in here, and we'll get into that. And one of the interesting pieces of this, and this is what I was talking about in terms of dealing with knowing which exact actions to take on a specific entity, kind of gets complicated. So when you look at it from a very raw perspective, this is how it's visually, this is how it's raw. You can learn a lot from it. So for instance, the ID for it, these are the fields a base content, m.content can store. But as you notice, the ones I added, which are of type blah, which are of type user group, and there's another type, I forget the name of it, but the field names differ just because I manually added them. They don't come by default. The fields themselves, these basically tell me that these are not culture specific, because if they're culture specific fields, you'll see something like this, which is culture and value. Some relationships, so this was the one I was talking about. As a m.content entity, you do have to assign it to a content type, and it's related to a content type called user group, and it's a parent to child relationship, and it is locale based. And then if you wanted to take a look at the user group type itself, you can go to that and take a look at what the metadata for that is. And how this helps is when you're trying to say add a content type and you have no clue how to do it, when you look at this feed, you know that it is of this type, and you have to attach a parent of type content type, and you have to give it a value of an ID and somehow link to it, right? Then the same thing happens with other types. So a state, in order to assign a specific state as well. So it kind of gets a little bit easier once you get into it. The manage section is pretty much a place where you'll probably spend quite a bit of your time on, depending on how much work you do on the management part. But what I wanted to show you is the content types themselves. So by default, you get certain content types by default with the system. Bruce isn't one of them, promotion isn't one of them, but you could define your own custom types. Like I mentioned, the one in the content area on the left, you only have 3 types of fields, but when you go into the details part, you have much more different amount of selection for the field types. And option lists are basically drop downs when you have a small subset of values. Taxonomies are a little bit more complicated with hierarchical data set. And again, you could link a piece of content to other pieces of content, assets and products and fun stuff. So you can make it as complicated as you want. And it's pretty decent so far. I love the API, all the work I've done. I haven't had to do anything custom. I've just been able to use what I have so far. So what I'm going to do is I have a sample .NET Core app, which I usually use to run migrations from XP or external product systems into Content Hub. So I'll just specify some values to create a user group. So I'll go ahead and hit that. So what this is doing, and this is again, depends on the style of your working, how you want it to do things. So you could go ahead and write a .NET app which does this for you locally on your machine or on another environment. What I like to do in the way I build things is I like using Azure functions, and I'll tell you a reason why in a second. So to quickly go through how I added that piece of content. So I do have the Web Client Sdk added as references through NuGet. I am connecting to the Content Hub, and then I impersonate a user. So usually when you're trying to do assets or anything which should follow a content workflow or a certain workflow, I like to impersonate the user before creating things, because you add that piece of content or an entity in a specific workflow so that things can be followed. So assume you're adding it as a super user, then you're probably going around a lot of things you shouldn't be going around. And then it's a matter of just saying, hey, I want to create a new entity, and all of these are based on IDs or definition names. So as you can see, for a product is m.pcm.product, for content it's m.content. As you notice, I'm creating something of type content because CMP by default entity is m.content, but then I would need to assign it to a definition of type user group. So for blog, it's nice and clean, as you can see, but a user group, it is weird because I created it. So what we are hoping to do is create a piece of content, set attributes, and again, these are just name values, right? So if you go look at it, it's just the name of the field. And again, these, if they're locale specific, culture specific, you would have to specify the culture you're adding an attribute value for. In this case, the attributes I have are not culture specific, so I don't need to specify that. Here, essentially what we're doing is we're trying to add a parent to child relationship to content type, in this case, of type user group. Same exact way, we're trying to add content lifecycle relationship. Both of these are one-to-one, child to parent, but this one is one-to-many, parent to many children. And what we're trying to do is set the activity state for this one, and then you ended up saving it. It's all it takes. It's super fast, and you can do a lot of things. And again, you can add things to query stuff and a whole shebang. One of the reasons I do end up, and I don't want to go through the entire code for this, but the reason I go through and do it on Azure functions is just for the sake of scale. So in recent times, when we're trying to push these pieces of content, which are hundreds and thousands of these content items getting pushed from either a product system or from a Sitecore CMS and the assets you're pushing up, a lot of processing is happening, and you can't imagine it happening on a person's machine or even on a server, right? But we want these as individual units, almost like individual threads running. But where it becomes more apparent is when you're trying to create assets. So the only way to create and load assets through API is you give it a public URL link to load the asset. So for instance, I'm trying to upload a video, so I create the asset, set all the metadata I need to, but then I need to create a fetch job to say, hey, by the way, I created this asset, go get the video file from this public URL, and you provide the public URL, create a fetch job, and then at that point, you have to sit and wait for that fetch job to complete. And as you can imagine, if it's something small like an image, which is a meg, it'll be done pretty quickly. But a video file, which might be 50, 100, a couple of 100 meg, it might take quite a bit of time, or a PDF, which is like 50 meg, right? So we have a fetch job, which is basically sitting and checking every 15 seconds to say, hey, am I done? Am I done? Am I done? So once it's done is when we know the asset is attached to the file itself. Then we can create a public link and then go back and update the system from which it originated, which which takes time, and each asset will take different time. So because of that, I find it very easy for me to just push everything into an Azure function, and it pushes it through queues, and it just waits and things get done. So it makes life a little bit easier. The other thing I wanted to show you guys, and let me refresh, see, we should probably get it, but so this is running on my local, something I just spun up yesterday. Again, super easy. There's not a lot of code on here. So essentially, I'm connecting to the API saying that I need all content types of type m.content, checking if they are of type user group. And if they are, I'm just listing it on this MVC.NET Core app. So again, super easy, not complicated at all. I found the APIs to be very easy to get whatever functionality you need to get done. That's pretty much, I can answer your questions, but I wanted to quickly go through this. So we do have a couple of webinars on Content Hub coming up. So if you're interested, go to konobos.com/webinars and sign up. The Supercharged product strategy, which I'm doing with Chris, is mainly for walking through how people struggle with hundreds and thousands of products as well as assets associated with them. So it's a product specific strategy on how you deal with it, how you can set up your Content Hub PCM in a way that it makes your life easy. The second one, which is Look Before You Leap, is actually very interesting to me. It's more for people who are looking into Content Hub, who are hoping to purchase something similar to Content Hub, what it gives you, and what's the process. And I think one of the biggest things we suffered is we didn't know what the process of dealing with the domain models, getting them added, how do you test it out, how do you make it customized to your organization and the entire process, how do you have a migration strategy in place is essentially what is missing out there. So we're hoping to educate people on that, and just the fact that Content Hub is so misunderstood. It's one of my favorite products in Sitecore nowadays, but we look at it too much from a web perspective, and that's a big issue, that you look at content from just a web only perspective and just think about different channels. The other one, which I'm doing with Sumit on this symposium track on day 2, is more about integrating Content Hub CMP with the Cmp connector with Sitecore. There's a DAM connector as well, but this mainly concentrates on the Cmp connector, how it's powerful enough to sync items to your local instance, as well as the roadmap and what's coming up, and a demo on that. And as usual, I should be very reachable on the public channels, so do reach out to us. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you guys have. With that, I will stop rambling, and I am more than happy to answer any questions you guys might have.